Hello, folks. This is Rick Manning, President of Americans for Limited Government, coming to you from the just outside the Beltway in Washington, D.C. And a lot of things are happening right now, but I want to focus on something that is on everybody's minds. But it's one of those things that's hard to get your arms around, and that is high price of gas, high price of energy, and the impacts of that. We've talked a lot about energy and with some kind of without many numbers behind it, but I want to just go today and talk a little bit about the numbers, a little bit about what can be done, and it can be done pretty immediately if the government wanted to do this, if the federal government wanted to do it. Some states have been, other states have ignored it. But let me just say, one of the reasons that we're talking about this is because the Biden administration released their budget for the United States, their proposed budget for the United States for 2023, for fiscal year 2023. Fiscal year 2023 starts October 1, 2022, and goes to September 30th, 2023. And this is what the Biden administration says they would like for Congress to pass in order to meet the priorities that the Biden administration has. So that's the budget. So they've released their budget. Their budget is a $5.8 trillion budget. That's 5.8 trillion. The last Trump budget for fiscal year 2021 was a $4.8 trillion budget. Now, this doesn't count any of the extra COVID spending, any of the spending on various wars, or any of that kind of stuff. So this is strictly the normalized budget that deals with the so-called mandatory programs like food stamps, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and all that. That's the spending anticipated there, plus the spending for national defense, the spending for Homeland Security, the spending for border protection, the spending for the Labor Department, for EPA, for the entire gamut of all the three-letter agencies out there that aren't on the defense side. So you have both defense, guns, and butter spending plus mandatory. Understanding how this works, the so-called mandatory spending is spending that Congress has put on autopilot. Essentially, they say, we're going to spend this money. We're not going to reauthorize it every year. We're not going to reappropriate it every year. We can make changes based upon needs in the program, but we have to have a vote of Congress to make those changes, which is obviously very difficult. And so there is and so this is spending that Congress doesn't deal with in the normal appropriations process. And quite honestly, it's why when Congress is talking about, these regular fights and we're going to fiscal cliff and all that garbage, and CRs and omnibus and all those words, we're really fighting about 30% of the budget because almost 70% is on autopilot unless Congress specifically steps in to take steps to stop it. So in that $5.8 trillion budget for Biden, about 2 trillion, maybe 1.8 trillion or so is in non-mandatory spending and discretionary spending, and the rest is in mandatory spending. So that's the key element. So just understanding what this looks like. 5.8 trillion is obviously 1 trillion more in the course of 2 years than what the Trump administration proposed to spend. Once again, much of the deficit that occurred under in the last year of Trump and the first year of Biden was a direct result of extra spending for COVID and extra spending for a variety of different things, whether it was Afghanistan or doing some extra stuff on the border. Those were all separately emergency funds taking care of people. If there's a hurricane in Texas, going in and do emergency spending to be able to help people recover in a place like Texas or any place where they have an emergency that needs federal assistance. So that's extra, and those are direct add-ons to the budget deficit. So understand that. Now, one of the interesting, how this relates to energy is one of the Biden proposals would, under the guise of stopping energy subsidies, fossil fuel subsidies, and under the guise of that, Biden would actually raise taxes on oil and gas producers by about $46.3 billion. So they're going to raise taxes with a direct stated desire, to make it so it's harder to create domestic or foreign, but particularly domestic, oil and natural gas, to create new sources of oil and natural gas. That's their budget, the directly stated reason, because that is against the Biden policy, which is one based around climate change and renewables, and we're going to kill oil and natural gas. So when the Biden administration, when Joe Biden or anybody in his administration or anybody on the Democrat side, or even some Republicans say, hey, we really like, you're not against oil, natural gas, or it's not our fault that we're having diminishing production. That is a flat out lie. It is the administration policy to restrict production of oil and natural gas in this country. That is their stated policy. And the way you do that is you go back and you do a full wholesale review on all leases to make certain that anybody who's applied to be able to drill a hole in federal land, which is leased to them, that person has to go back to square one on the regulatory process and defend every piece of paper they were forced to file before they could drill that hole. So that ends natural gas, new oil production. And because the objective isn't to get to yes, the objective is to create no, to delay, stall, and make it not profitable to do so. That is what the goal is. So don't allow the big lie to be told to you about how this administration is actually, that they're not responsible for the high energy prices. There is some small portion of the energy price increases that are a result of the Russia-Ukraine war. Some small amount of that is true. There is a significant portion of it that's a result of the squeeze on domestic energy production. And a significant portion of it is the fact that this administration has chosen to be at war with Saudi Arabia. And as a result, Saudi Arabia has diminished the amount of oil they're pumping and pushing out into the world market, driving the price up. That is a fact. And that is the truth. So do not allow those guys, the Jen Psaki's of the world, to tell you anything else. Look at their own budget, look at what they are saying on their budget, and what you will discover is that these guys are, in fact, at war with you. And I'm trying to find the exact, okay. I'm going to read you the reason for change, this is in the budget. It's page 31 out of 120 pages on the budget. And the administration, the Biden administration, Department of Treasury, is explaining why they want to eliminate change the tax law to increase the tax burden on oil and natural gas. I'm just going to read you this one paragraph. This is once again page 31 of the budget released out of the Treasury Department. You find it at treasury.gov. And here's what they say. These oil, gas, and coal tax preferences distort markets by encouraging more investment in the fossil fuel sector than would occur under a neutral system. This market distortion is detrimental to long-term energy security and now listen to that, okay? Lower oil, natural gas, and coal prices are according to the administration, is a distortion. Detrimental to long-term energy security is also inconsistent with the administration's policy of supporting a clean energy economy, reducing our reliance on oil, and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So when they talk about, Green New Deal, we're not doing Green New Deal stuff. Don't worry about it. You don't have to worry about that. They stated in the Department of Treasury states it in their document that they're changing tax policy. They're recommending changes to tax policy specifically to try to choke out the ability for oil, natural gas to compete and coal to compete. Now, let's be clear. This is the same administration that wants to put subsidies for electric cars. This is the same administration that is subsidizing renewable energy and so-called renewable energy, wind, solar, at record levels. They claim that they're saying, these subsidies distort the market. The distortion of the market, wonder what the distortion of the market is? The wind production tax credit is a distortion of the market, where people are paid to invest in wind farms, and they get a pretty big tax subsidy for investing in wind farms. no less of an expert than Warren Buffett, though the top, somebody's been credited as being the top investor in America. Warren Buffett has stated the reason he invests in wind farms is because of the tax credit. Because as an entity, as a business entity, it is a losing proposition. So we want to talk about distorting markets. You distort markets by subsidizing wind production tax credit and getting windmills all over our landscape, all over the former pristine hills going between Riverside and Palm Springs, among other places. And instead you actually are distorting the market by the wind production tax credit because it forces dollars. It creates a situation where you have no lose investments simply based on being able to write them off against your taxes, against the profits you have elsewhere, dollar for dollar. It's a credit, as those of you who are doing tax season right now may realize, a credit is different than a deduction. A credit allows you to say, I owe $100 in taxes. And if I've got a $100 credit, I don't owe any taxes. A deduction is I owe $100 worth of taxes. I have a $100 deduction. I'm paying taxes. The top tax in my right now is, let's say you're paying 20% just for grins and giggles. I'm paying 20% on the last dollars that I made, since it's progressive. So that means your $100 deduction is worth $20 and you pay $80. So the difference between a credit, in this example, a credit and a deduction, is an $80 difference in terms of what you pay. And that's why the wind production tax credit is so coveted by investors, and particularly by big investors like Buffett, because they make a lot of money on a lot of investments. And the government's basically saying, we're going to just take anything you invest in wind production, we're just going to just take it off your profit of how much taxes you're going to owe. If you invest $100 million, just take $100 million off the taxes you owe. That's a directly subsidized industry. So please understand, when they say that they're against market distortions, the left engages in the greatest market distortions possible through tax law. And so let's just be honest about it, and we'll have an honest discussion. And if you want to get rid of all energy tax credits and subsidies, that's fine. Get rid of all of them. That includes, by the way, the amount of money that car companies make, because there's a level of number of cars that they produce, electric cars, and they sell. They get a massive deduction from the government in terms of encouraging them to produce electric vehicles. And in fact, Tesla really never made a profit in its early years. It still hasn't, by the way, but never made a profit. The money that they would show Wall Street as having made was all based on the government subsidy for the amount of electric car purchases and electric car manufacturing. That's just true. And so now you see Ford, GM, Chrysler, all the rest of them are in the EV business. And the reason they're in that business is because they're being paid by the federal government to be in that business. And that's distorting the market once again. So from a budget perspective, just understand the Biden administration is putting their whole foot on the scale in favor of everything but oil, natural gas, and coal, which provide a vast majority of the electricity in this country. Just once again, the truth. So in favor of technologies that don't and won't and don't have the capacity to and aren't resilient. So that's a key. So just as you're hear them talk about energy, understand Joe Biden may say, and his minions may say, we don't have anything to do with the high cost of gas, but the fact of the matter is their policies do. Let's talk about some things that could be done. This is very simple. And you have a federal gas tax. I think it's 18 cents per gallon, 18.6 cents a gallon, I think. So you have a federal gas tax. The federal government could go say right now, we're going to lower the gas prices by 18 cents a gallon simply by ending the federal gas tax and putting a moratorium on it for a period of time to get through the crisis. They can do that. They lower it, but they lower it when gas is 180 a gallon. It's 10% of the cost of your gallon of gas. When gas is 360 a gallon, it's 5%, because it's a fixed number. Your individual state could say, well, we're going to lower our state gas, and we're going to end our state gas tax, and we're going to lower our state gas tax. In Maryland, they ended their state gas tax for a 1 month period, lowering the price of gas by lowering the tax, which was 39 cents a gallon. So right now in Maryland, you pay 39 cents less a gallon than you do in Virginia. And ironically, people say, well, these gas stations are just going to keep the money. That's not what happened. You saw an immediate drop by about 39 cents because they're competitors, and the station across the street is lowering their price 39 cents. And so they all had to. That's the nature of the marketplace. So when the state government got out of the gas tax business, it lowered the price of gas. If the federal government got out, it lowered the price of gas by 18 cents, between 18 and 20 cents per gallon. Just would happen. That would be because competition would demand it and would create it. So if you really wanted to do something, push that to Congress right now as an emergency measure and do it. It increased the budget deficit. It would have an impact on the Highway Trust Fund. But you know what? If this is something you really want to do and lower the price of gas, you can lower it right now by 18 cents a gallon. Just do it. It's a simple thing, easy to do. Second thing they could do, and this is how about if you really actually wanted to lower the price of gas, because most of the contracts are on futures, and since people are betting on what the price of oil is going to be 3 months from now, 6 months from now, not necessarily what it is now. So if you really want to deal with that, relatively easy. Go instead of saying we're going to make it more expensive to pull oil out of the ground, make it less expensive to pull oil out of the ground. Encourage drilling, encourage people to and push through permits. So businesses are able to pump more oil. If you push through the permits and you streamline the permitting process right now, as opposed to blocking permits, you will see a lot more holes in the ground, because here's what happens. A lot of the U.S. domestic oil industry are not the Exxon Mobils. They're smaller companies, small and mid-sized companies that have oil underneath the ground, and they're trying to get the oil out. It is in their interest to get as much oil out at a high price as possible. That's how they make a profit. That's how they thrive. So that will happen, and we'll suddenly see more oil coming into the system, and into our refineries to be refined. Second thing you can do, under the renewable fuel standard, which is what kind of makes it so you have to do ethanol and stuff like that, and it's an artificial government cost to force people to use corn as 10% of your oil. And by the way, ethanol is extremely inefficient, and it actually costs more from a carbon standpoint to create ethanol from growing the corn to processing it than it would if you didn't. But be that as it may, the corn ethanol subsidies, which is the RFS standard, the renewable fuel standard is part of, have actually caused U.S. refineries to go out of business because there's rules. You have to buy a certain number of renewable fuel standard credits. And these credits, if you don't have those credits, if you haven't produced enough ethanol or other biofuels as your refinery, you have to buy somebody else, another company has produced more than they need to have for their company. And so they sell them on the open market. And so a company that was currently not processing ethanol has to go off and pay a company that does produce ethanol a bunch of money in order to be able to meet the federal standards. And it's called RINs credits. I'm not going to get into the details, but it's an artificial unit of value that you have to meet certain criteria in order to be able to keep your license. And we've actually had, in the last 4 years, we've had manufacturers, actual people who refine oil, generally small refiners, go out of business because they can't afford the RINs credits. Well, get rid of that. You want to have more refining? Get rid of the RINs credits. It's a stupid standard. It's a stupid rule that the only reason it exists is because people have to go through Iowa to get a nomination for the presidency. And if you got rid of the RINs credits, you would effectively open the door for a lot more energy production and refining in this country. And you would open up new refineries that have been shut down. You would be opening up and you'd be creating more refinery capacity. This is simply by opening up refineries that have been shut down and doing some refurb on them to update them. But you wouldn't have these refineries, ones that you couldn't afford to retrofit to make them fit the ethanol standards because they didn't produce enough oil, or they produced it for niche audiences like kerosene or other things like that doesn't have corn in it. And so this is a way, simple way to increase their refining capacity significantly right now. But you won't see the Biden administration doing that because no, they want to choke our refining capacity. And that, my friends, is the true story about how you actually get from point A to point B to getting pretty immediate increase in domestic manufacturing, domestic production of oil, domestic production of natural gas, domestic production of gasoline. And so that's within this scope of increasing it within 6 to 9 months kind of time spectrum. Short term, once again, this is really not rocket science. Stop playing footsie with the Iranians. Stop giving the Iranians money to attack the Saudis. Stop being the funder of the proxy attacks on the Saudi oil fields and the proxy attacks from terrorist groups on Riyadh. If you do that, the Saudis will talk to you. The people at the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, will talk to you, and they will sit there and say, "Yeah, we'll increase production." But you know what they're not going to do? They're not going to increase production to help an administration that is turning money and sending money to the terrorists who are attacking their country. And who would? Nobody would. That's the answer. Once again, that's a short-term answer. Stop the games in the Middle East and stop funding terrorism against Saudi Arabia. And if you do that, you know what happens? Very simply, Saudi Arabia says, okay, you're not funding, people want to destroy us. So yeah, we're willing, we're going to make more money. We'll push more oil out the door. OPEC oil production is down 10%. That's a large part of why we have higher oil prices. OPEC's saying we're not going to do more. And OPEC, make no mistake, OPEC is Saudi Arabia. So that's a short-term solution. And your long-term solution is get a different government. Get an administration that doesn't view oil as evil, doesn't view domestic energy security as being undesirable, that would rather have us dependent upon and build Venezuela oil production than U.S. oil production, and make us dependent upon countries that don't like us very much. Quite honestly, I'm kind of sick of that. And that's the current administration's stance. It is whereas the Trump administration's energy policy was all of the above. They would promote renewable fuels. They would promote oil, natural gas. They'd build natural gas terminals for export, and they created a situation where the U.S. is one of the biggest exporters of liquefied natural gas to Europe, and that all occurred during the Trump administration, because they had a vision of not only having a natural gas industry, but being able to offset the Russians' ability to be natural gas dominant in Europe. And that's in the exact situation we've seen with Germany over the last few months that Donald Trump warned about 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and the Germans laughed at him. So, folks, this is this is the little energy tutorial. And I just thought you would want to know that. I'm going to get on one other thing, and this is just came out. And you want to talk about something that can irritate you. This is on immigration. Okay. We're now at the 6-month part of this fiscal year. Okay. So we're at the end of April, let's see, October, no. So end of March is the 6th month, halfway through the fiscal year. We have now had in the 6 months over 1 million, according to the Department of the Border Patrol, over 1 million illegal aliens coming through our borders. In 6 months, they've had 1 million encounters. That means that's their encounters. Those aren't people who snuck through without being an encounter. Those are people who have had to be processed and then put on buses and sent to the interior of this country. 1 million. Very few of those people get sent back home under the Biden administration. They're ignoring the Remain in Mexico policy. And as a result, we are being flooded with illegal immigrants. We don't see those stories anymore because it isn't in the interests of the left and the media that they control to show those stories. We don't have AOC heading to the border and crying at an empty parking lot through a chain link fence in a faux media spectacle, because AOC doesn't want to pay attention to what's going on at the border. The reality is what's going on at the border is it is absolutely a sieve with 1 million encounters, with hundreds of thousands, well over hundreds of thousands, multiple hundreds of thousands of people who aren't an encounter, who just come through. And I'll tell you the secret: the people who are getting through who aren't encounters are the bad guys. The cartels know. You put a family, you put a young mother and a young child in a position of jeopardy, and the Border Patrol will deploy to save that family on the Rio Grande River. That will happen every time. They will save those people's lives. They'll get vilified for it, but they'll save those people's lives. But while they're deploying to save the family that's been let loose to die by the cartel, while they're doing that, the cartel's running people through the gaps that have been created in our border system because the Border Patrols had to deploy. And they're running the worst of the worst through those gaps. And that, my friends, is immigration. And every time you hear, and this is not just in general, okay? Nothing bothered me more, nothing got me more angry than when I'd hear this administration or other defenders of this administration talk about, we have to protect the territorial integrity of Ukraine. Russia should not have attacked. Russia violated that. They're in the midst of talks. Hopefully that all ends and no more people die in that conflict. Okay, let's just be clear. Russia, bad, wrong. But when Kamala Harris, vice president, says we have to defend the territorial integrity of Ukraine, and they're not willing to defend the territorial integrity of the United States, something's drastically wrong. And the numbers are in. And folks, we have an invasion going on. And the last numbers I looked at showed that this was not just a Central America problem. It wasn't a Mexico problem. We had people who were having encounters from over 50 different nations around the world. Because if you want to get into America, if you want the golden ticket, get to our border, our southern border. And chances are you win. And if you have to pay the cartels $7,500 to get there per person, you know who else wins? The cartels, who are human traffickers. Nothing more, nothing less. They're human traffickers. And guess what? You get across that border, you're illegal. You know who knows where you are? The very human traffickers who brought you across. Because they have money exchanges where they say, you want to send your money back home? You have to send it through us. And so they get a piece of every dollar that goes back home. The cartels make more money on human trafficking than they do on drugs. So let's not be naive about this. Human trafficking is a huge business, and America is the destination of choice for those engaged in human trafficking. And folks, when we sit there and say, okay, it's not our problem, we're going to sit there and, it creates cheap labor, blah, blah, blah. Those people who say that, you are no different than somebody who justified using human trafficking to bring people across the ocean to pick your cotton. The difference is that those people didn't come voluntarily. It's a huge difference. But the truth is, human trafficking is human trafficking. The abuses in human trafficking are so grotesque as to be almost unbelievable. Our Border Patrol is vilified. ICE is vilified. They deal with the left in various cities who literally try to hide criminals who are illegal aliens so they won't be deported, because the value system amongst the left, who are in charge of many of our cities, is that they would rather protect a criminal illegal alien than send that illegal alien back to where they came from. They would rather have that illegal alien not be in jail and busy engaging in rape, mayhem, robbery, and murder than they would to have that illegal alien sent back to where they came from and not be part of our society, because protecting an illegal alien's ability to be here is a higher value than protecting the people they have sworn to serve and protect. Once again, hard truth, but it is the truth. So when we sit there and we talk about the budget, when we talk about this upcoming, we have another set of appropriations bills in September. We'll have, throughout this whole next 6 months, we're going to talk about appropriations bills. Start demanding that your congressmen, your senators do something about it. Start demanding they do something about it. You care about immigration? Tell your senators that stand up and fight. Do not allow another appropriations bill to be passed that does not secure the border. Don't allow it. The Republicans have the power to do that. And they'll talk a great game, but they don't. But unless they're willing to fight for that talk, you can't. If they're not willing to fight for it when they need your vote to get the majority, don't expect them to fight for it when they have the majority. So demand them, hold them accountable. And folks, there's a lot more that I could ramble here forever, but the fact is, this budget, we're going to be going over tooth and nail, basically a fine tooth comb, and we'll be looking at other things that are in there. But just understand, the Joe Biden administration has increased the budget, their desired budget for the United States by $1 trillion from what it was 2 years ago, what was submitted by President Trump. And make no mistake, there's not even an attempt to balance this budget. It's not even, they don't even pretend anymore. So if we want to get fiscal sanity, if we want to get inflation under control by stop printing money, we damn well better start paying attention to this stuff. And we'll be providing you with insights in the weeks ahead, so you'll be prepared to talk about it and be informed, so you can get people around you to become informed, educated, and activated. So let's see what I apologize for rambling a little bit there. I have not looked at the things, but let's see at the comments. But I've got Diana Mann. Hey, Diana. Democrats don't do well with truth and facts, accountability, and responsibility, 2 words that absolutely don't exist. I agree with you. I will tell you that one of the challenges is on my end is sometimes the government's pretty bipartisan in making deals that don't make a lot of sense. And even in the Trump administration, we couldn't get rid of the renewable fuel standard because there was a trade-off between what the Iowa senators wanted and what the Texas senators wanted, and it was a big fight. And we ended up losing that fight. ALG was heavily involved. That's why I know about it. But that doesn't mean we stop trying. I'm not going to comment on Earl Randall Bailey. FJB, I'm not going to comment on it. Diana, common sense. Thank you. Is Putin cleaning out corruption? Heck, I don't know what Putin's doing. There seems to be a purge going on. That often isn't cleaning out corruption. That's oftentimes cleaning out opposition. Soviets had purges regularly. They typically were brutal, and they were at times when the government was unstable and being challenged internally. And the truth is, in totalitarian systems, the whoever wins kills the people who lose, and that's what happens in totalitarian systems, whether they're banana republics or the Kremlin or Beijing for that matter. So understand that, yeah, there's a purge going on. I don't know who's going to win that purge. I doubt it has anything to do with corruption. Let's see. The government grows, Bill Hines, thank you. The government grows with every national crisis and war. How do you ratchet that down without some type of legislation forcing the government to go back to pre-crisis, pre-war? Bill, that is a great question. And the single best way to do that, the Republicans in Congress and the House in particular stumbled upon this, and it actually caused us to come near a balanced budget in 2014, 2015. It significantly cut the budget deficit. And that was something called sequester. And what sequester did is it basically locked in the spending levels and put a zero growth in the spending levels on the discretionary budget. And in doing so, you had both inflation, which increases the cost of doing business, but also increases your tax revenues. You had growth in terms of the economic growth, which was mild economic growth, but it still was economic growth, which increased your revenues, the revenue intake by the federal government, not by raising taxes, but simply by having growth from really kind of the depths of the housing crisis. And that was the recipe. A 3-year sequester basically stuck the budget, the spending, overall spending in the budget at about between 3.4 and 3.6 trillion dollars from 2012 to 2014. I might be off a year, but that's what I remember. And so you had and it actually went down. The first year it was 3.6. And by the time then went down to about 3.45 and then went up to about 3.5. But once the sequester was broken, it was broken by defense hawks who wanted more Pentagon spending and more equipment bought. And it was combined with the left who wanted more social spending. And they combined to create a right-left coalition that blew up the sequesters so you could get more Pentagon money. That's what broke the sequester. Is the Pentagon wanted more money. They were only getting like 720 billion, something like that. Maybe it was a little less. And they wanted more. So consequently, rather than figure out what programs work, what programs didn't work, we broke the single tool that actually was bringing us to balance. And in doing so, we've been out of control ever since. So if we went to a sequester system, that would work. After World War II in 1946, the federal government spending was slashed by 80%. Now, recognize we didn't have the same level of mandatory spending back then. In fact, Social Security was brand new, Medicare didn't exist. And so we didn't have the massive amount of mandatory spending that's part of that budget. And so cutting the size of government, the amount of spending by 80% isn't possible now. But that's what the government did. At the same time, they created the GI Bill. So they created a program to help GIs coming back from service to go to college and make a better life for themselves, which really ramped up and caused the massive growth in the American economy by training our people. So that was a big deal, a big part of our growth. But yeah, that's what happened after World War II is we just cut the budget. We said, we can't deficit spend. Boom, we're cutting the budget. And in some respects, all those agencies that were started under Franklin Delano Roosevelt, they didn't have the entrenched constituencies at that point. And so they didn't have the same capacity to fight back, to protect their budgets. And so while they didn't eliminate those programs, they starved them for a few years. And after World War II, that's how we dealt with the fact we were over 200% debt to GDP during World War II, and we immediately just bounced it down by cutting spending like crazy and saying, we need the private sector to work now. So historically, the times we've done it successfully, that's how it's been done. We're in a different world now than we were in 1946. The government's much bigger. It's much more entrenched. It's much more difficult to fight. And quite honestly, there's so many constituencies that have a vested interest in big government that it's really, really hard to cut it at all. But the sequestration and that the House Republicans came up with, and quite honestly, the Senate Democrats agreed to, because they were under a lot of political stress. They agreed to. You ended up with and Barack Obama signed, by the way. That's how we ended up really narrowing the budget deficit before, and it may be the only way we can do it, because it forces Congress into fiscal restraint. But there has to be the political will to do that. And the political will comes from you. Let's see what else we got. That appears to be it. So with that, I appreciate you all tuning in. This is, I know budget talk's kind of boring, and hopefully the energy talk was at least informative and interesting, and the immigration talk was enraging, and the answers to the questions were in some way historically informative, and maybe even historically accurate if we're really lucky. So with that, I appreciate all you coming in. Subscribe to the channel, let your friends know, and also please take a look. Subscribe to Americans for Limited Government. Follow us on Facebook. We're on Twitter. We're on Cloud Hub. We're on Getter. Basically anywhere you can go and do social media, we're there. So go check us out and follow us on your favorite social media platforms, so you can find out more about what's going on overall and a lot of the other great content we have. With that, I wish you a good day, and thank you very much.